Hello again. Here's my follow-up video where I explain how Pivot works with a in-depth detail and a good example. The first thing that's important to understand is we have A as a matrix of values, but we reference it with a lowercase a, and what confuses people is the values you end up putting there. Um, so say you wanted to swap a constraint, the value for the constraint would be that row, not the number associated with that variable. But if you have the variable, you can do it by uh, the spot it's in, and it can be confusing. Maybe you think you're switching the non-basic variable x5, and you shouldn't actually have 5 within here because that would be out of bounds. So here's my run through example. I took this example from the book, but I ended up choosing a different entering and leaving variable. So for this one, we'll swap x of 5 with x2. And so with that, we would have e equals 2 and l equals 2 as well. Um, and the reason why is because it's the second constraint, so it's the second row. So the first thing the pivot method will do is create a new slack variable for that line, and we'll grab the 24 and then divide it by 2, and we'll get 12 for the new slack. And then I sort of fill this in beforehand to see what's there. We're creating the new coefficient for the first variable, and what we do is we grab the coefficient here, and we grab the coefficient here, and we divide the two. Um, this method will have the old variables and coefficients while working on the new one, so we can reference both of them as we work on it, which will be relevant later. And then for the third variable, we do the same thing, and we'll take the 5 and divide it by 2. The one thing that's slightly different is for the spot where the second variable was, we will just take that and have 1 divided by it, kind of like the inverse of it. And then at that point, we would have, instead of x of 5 equals this, we'd have x of 2. And well, we pretty much just set the original line equal to x2 rather than x5. So everything besides this got added or subtracted over and then divided by -2. But moving on now, what we'll have to do is substitute x of 2 with what we have here. And the way they do that within the function is for any other constraint, the slack variable will be the 30 we have here minus the combination of 1 times the slack variable in the new line that we found. So it's 30 minus 12 equals 18. And then for the first coefficient, we grab this and then we subtract 1 by 1. And this one's a little confusing because the values we have, but the extra 1 is also grabbed from here. And so it's we get negative, or yeah, we get -2 in this case. I typoed there. And then for this one, we grab we're working on the coefficient for the third variable in this line. So we'll take the 3 and we'll subtract 1 times the 5/2 that we have here. And we'll get 11/12 minus. And then we'll work on the middle piece. And for this, it's just -1 times the new coefficient we found before. So we'll have 18 minus 2x1 plus 1 half x5 minus 11 halves x3. And I went and did the other constraint. But the last thing we need to do is go through the objective function. And it did not have an optional constant before, but it will have one now. And we'll take the 0 that it was before, and we'll just add the old one. And that's from just substituting in here. And since it's positive, stuff kind of just adds rather than subtracts like we had before. And then for the first coefficient in this line, we'll take the 3 here and then subtract it by the coefficient here times the coefficient there. And for this, we'll get 4. And then we will move on to the third variable. I skipped over the second one because it's different. For this one, we grab the 2, and then we subtract it by the 1, which is here. And then we times that 1 by 5 over 2, and we'll get negative 1 half. And then we can work on the middle variable where we substituted. The coefficient for this is just negative 1 times the coefficient we found for x of 5. And it stays the same in this case. So if you were to do this by hand, all you have to do is, for the constraint you picked, its variable to leave, and you take that line, then you set it equal to the variable that you wanted to enter, the left-hand side. So we had x of 5 equals 24 minus 2 times x1 minus 2 times x2 minus 5 times x3. And all we did was subtract 24 plus 2x1 plus 5x3. And then we just had to divide the coefficient off of that. And that's how you get the first constraint line. And then for the rest, you just plug in for x2. And the same thing applies for the objective function. But the tricks to it that were confusing before is that not only do you need to grab values from the original Slack form that we had, but you also start to use some from the new Slack form we had. But the algebra that you do is pretty simple. That's it. I hope this clears things up for you guys. I hope you have a good weekend. And that's it.